You won't believe what happened in today's story.
The house greeted him with silence, not the ordinary kind, but a thick, suffocating silence, like a web stretched tight across the walls. Every shift of air made the floorboards complain, every breath echoed too loudly in the hollow rooms. Alexei pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. A stench struck him at once, dampness, dust, and something else. Metallic, sweet, sickening. He froze, listening. Somewhere deeper in the house, something dripped. Step, another. A thin line of red stretched along the baseboard. At first he thought it was peeling paint, but when he crouched closer his stomach dropped. A fresh smear of blood glistened on the wallpaper. It climbed higher and ended in a clear handprint, pressed hard into the wall before sliding downward. He touched it with his fingertips, warm, not dry yet. The hallway stretched toward the stairs. Dark drops dotted the floorboards, leading upward. Even the banister bore crimson streaks, as if someone had pulled themselves along, leaving a trail. "Hello," his voice fell flat, swallowed by the air. No reply. He climbed the staircase, every creak sounding like a warning. The metallic reek grew stronger. Halfway up, a wet tap struck his cheek. Reflexively, he wiped it and saw his finger come away red. He looked up. From the ceiling beam, a drop of blood dangled and fell, warm against his skin. Heart hammering, Alexei hurried to the landing. At the end of the upstairs corridor, a door stood ajar. Dark streaks smeared the floorboards, dragging toward it. He extended a trembling hand and nudged the door open. The hinges gave a long, wounded groan. The room was empty, no body, no movement, only thin curtains stirring in the draft. But in the middle of the floor lay something that froze his breath, a golden locket on a long chain. He picked it up. The lid bore an engraving, a pattern of branches and a bird's wing. He recognized it instantly. The locket belonged to his sister, Marina. But she had left for the city 3 weeks ago. How was it here, and why was it smeared with fresh blood? Alexei clenched the locket, feeling the sticky wetness between his fingers. It explained nothing. It only opened darker questions. Behind him, somewhere downstairs, a door clicked shut on its own. Part 2, the neighbor's warning. The locket weighed heavy in Alexei's palm as he stepped outside into the dusk. The air felt colder than it should have, thick with the smell of damp earth. He tucked the bloodied chain into his pocket, half expecting to feel it burn against his skin. A voice startled him. "You shouldn't be here." Alexei turned sharply. At the edge of the overgrown path stood an old man, his frame stooped but his eyes sharp and steady. He wore a worn coat, buttoned high despite the mild evening, and leaned on a crooked cane. "Mr. Rogov?" Alexei asked. He remembered the man from childhood, the reclusive neighbor who never joined holidays, never smiled at village gatherings. The old man nodded once, though his gaze never softened. "The house doesn't want you back. Best you leave tonight." Alexei let out a dry laugh, more to steady himself than anything. "The house, it's just wood and stone. What happened inside, it's not," he trailed off, realizing how hollow he sounded. Rogov took a step closer, his cane sinking into the wet earth. "I told your mother years ago, some stains never wash out. She didn't listen, and now you're standing in the middle of it." "What stains?" Alexei pressed. The old man's jaw tightened. For a moment, it seemed he might turn away without answering. But then he muttered, "Blood runs thickest in this family, and not just through veins." The words lingered, unsettling, as if they carried a meaning Alexei wasn't ready to face. That night he returned inside, determined to prove the old man wrong. Yet as darkness settled over the estate, the house seemed to breathe differently. Wooden beams groaned. A faint scratching came from somewhere in the walls, like nails dragging slow and deliberate. At midnight he woke to whispers, low, overlapping voices seeping through the thin plaster. He pressed his ear to the wall. Words blurred, but one name cut through the murmurs, his sister S. "Marina." He jerked back, heart pounding. He forced himself into the hallway. The silence there was complete, except for a single, rhythmic tap. A droplet of blood clung to the banister again. Fresh. Alexei followed it step by step to the front door. On the porch lay a folded scrap of paper, weighted with a stone. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. "Leave before she calls you inside." No signature, only a single crimson fingerprint pressed into the corner. Alexei looked toward the dark yard, but no one was there. The night swallowed everything. Part 3, the portrait with bleeding eyes. By morning, the note still lay on the table, the red fingerprint dull but unmistakable. Alexei had barely slept, the whispers echoing in his skull. He told himself it had to be a trick, maybe Rogov trying to scare him away, but the blood and no trick could make it warm to the touch. He walked the upstairs hallway, sunlight cutting narrow beams through the dust. As he passed the row of portraits, his steps slowed. The largest painting, the family portrait, dominated the wall, his parents in stiff formal wear, his younger self in the center, and Marina just beside him, frozen in oils, forever smiling. At first he thought the light was playing tricks, then his stomach lurched. Two thin crimson streaks glistened beneath Marina's eyes. He leaned closer. The paint was untouched, but the wet lines slid down the canvas like tears dripping onto the frame. He reached out, and when his finger brushed the streak, he recoiled. Blood, fresh, metallic, warm. The drop fell to the floor with a soft pat. Alexei stumbled back, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard. The moment he steadied himself, he noticed the gap. The board wasn't flush with the others. Heart racing, he pried it open. Inside the hollow space lay a bundle of letters, yellowed with age and bound by a ribbon. The script on the first envelope stopped him cold. It was his mother's handwriting. Hands shaking, he unfolded the first letter. I cannot forgive you, and yet I cannot let anyone know. What you did to your brother, what you made him do, will rot us all, if the children ever find out. The letter ended abruptly, ink smeared as though torn from her hand. Alexei sat frozen, the words cutting deeper than the blood on the portrait. His mother had never spoken of a brother. She was an only child, or so she claimed. He lifted another letter, but before he could open it, a faint sound broke the stillness. A slow, deliberate creak of a door hinge, somewhere at the end of the corridor. Alexei's throat tightened. He rose, clutching the letters to his chest. The family portrait loomed behind him, Marina's painted eyes glistening red, as though she were weeping silently at his discovery. Part 4: The Locked Room. The letters burned against his chest as Alexei moved through the hallway, every step heavier than the last. He couldn't shake the sound, the creak that had echoed just moments ago, but when he reached the end of the corridor, all the doors stood still, closed, silent. Except one. The attic hatch. It hung half open, the ladder lowered, as though someone had been waiting for him. Dust fluttered down in the dim shaft of light. Alexei swallowed hard. He remembered the attic from his childhood, always locked, always forbidden. His mother used to snap whenever he asked what was inside. Nothing up there worth your curiosity. Now it invited him. He climbed the ladder slowly, every rung moaning under his weight. The air grew thicker, heavy with dust, wood rot, and something fouler, a copper stench that curled into his throat. The attic stretched wide, filled with shrouded shapes, furniture draped in yellowing sheets, boxes stacked in precarious towers, old toys with glassy eyes catching the weak light. But in the center, surrounded by dust so thick it should have lain undisturbed for decades, glistened a fresh pool of blood. Alexei froze. The liquid was dark, almost black, spreading slowly across the warped floorboards. He knelt closer, expecting to see a body, but there was nothing. No trace of where the blood had come from. His hand trembled as he touched the sticky floor, still warm. A faint sound rose around him, not whispers this time, but the soft, rhythmic knock of something rocking. He turned his head. In the far corner, a rocking horse stood motionless. Its painted eyes were cracked, mane eaten by moths, and yet it shifted gently, as though unseen hands pushed it back and forth. Alexei staggered backward, heart hammering. His heel struck something solid. He looked down. It was a wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar. He pulled it open with trembling fingers. Inside lay a child's coat, navy blue, buttons missing, edges stiff with dried blood. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth, was a small object he hadn't seen in years. A stuffed rabbit, one ear torn, its fur matted and brown. The sight made his chest clench. This was his childhood toy, lost when he was 6. His mother had scolded him for misplacing it in the woods. But here it was, hidden in the attic, stained, preserved, waiting. The rocking horse creaked louder, its arc wider, as though something had climbed onto it. Alexei staggered for the ladder, clutching the rabbit against his chest. Behind him, the attic seemed to sigh, wood groaning, air thickening, the invisible rider urging the toy faster. He descended without looking back. At the bottom of the ladder, he heard the hatch above slam shut on its own. Part 5: The Family Gathering. By evening, Alexei no longer trusted the walls around him. Every creak set his nerves on edge, every shadow seemed to breathe. Yet the summons had arrived, a letter slid under his door sometime during the day, written in the same hurried hand as the porch warning. "Dinner all of us, you must attend." No signature, just that same crimson fingerprint at the bottom. He almost left it unanswered, almost, but curiosity outweighed fear. If others in his family had returned, maybe they carried the missing pieces of this puzzle. Maybe Marina herself was back. The dining room was lit by a single chandelier, its bulbs dim, their glow weak against the cavernous space. Dusty curtains sealed off the night outside. The long oak table stretched the length of the room, covered with dishes that looked too carefully arranged, roast meat glistening, bowls of fruit stacked high, wine already poured into glasses. And they were there. His uncle Sergei at the head of the table, broad-shouldered and smiling too wide. His cousin Alina, pale as candle wax, avoiding his eyes. And two others, faces Alexei half recognized from family photographs, relatives who should have been scattered across the country, yet now sat as though summoned by some unspoken command. "Alexei," Sergei boomed, raising his glass. "At last the house welcomes us all." The words slithered down Alexei's spine. He took a seat at the far end, the golden locket still tucked in his pocket, the stuffed rabbit hidden in his room upstairs. Dinner began in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks and the occasional clink of glass. No one touched the meat. The air carried a faint tang iron under the roasted spices. Finally, Alina spoke, her voice soft but cutting. "You found the attic, didn't you?" Every head turned toward him. Alexei's mouth went dry. How would you know that?" She didn't answer, she only smiled faintly, as if sharing a secret with herself. Uncle Sergei leaned forward, his grin tightening. "Some doors are meant to stay closed, boy, but then you've always been curious, like your mother." The mention of her stung. Alexei slammed his hand on the table. What did she hide from us? Who is this brother she wrote about? For a moment no one moved, then Sergei's laughter broke the silence, too loud, too forced. "We all have things better left unspoken. Don't dig too deep, nephew, you might not like what you find." Before Alexei could reply, Alina gave a soft gasp. Her hands clutched at her throat. A thin line of red trickled from her lips, darkening as it dripped onto her plate. She convulsed once, twice. The others remained seated, watching in eerie calm as though expecting it. Alexei shot up, rushing to her side. "Alina, what's happening?" Her eyes rolled back, pupils swallowed by white. Blood pooled at the corner of her mouth, staining her pale skin. She tried to speak, but the sound was only a wet choke. Then her body went still, her head slumping forward into the untouched food. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alexei turned, horrified, toward the others, but none of them moved to help. Sergei simply lifted his glass again, the faint smile never leaving his face. To family. The chandelier flickered, and for a heartbeat, Alexei thought he saw more shapes gathered at the far end of the table, faint, translucent, watching with eyes that gleamed red in the dim light. Part 6: The Empty Chair. Alina's body was still slumped against the table when Alexei staggered back, his chest heaving. The copper stench of her blood filled the room, mixing with the heavy spices of the untouched meal. "Do something," he shouted. She's. But no one moved. Uncle Sergei sipped his wine as though nothing had happened. The others kept their eyes low, hands folded, their faces pale but disturbingly calm. Finally, Sergei set down his glass with a deliberate clink. She was weak. It happens in this family. Alexei's skin prickled. Happens. Sergei's smile never wavered. You'll see. Alexei glanced at Alina again. Her lips were stained black with dried blood, her still form grotesquely framed by silver platters and scattered fruit. He reached for her shoulder, but before he could touch her, Sergei barked. "Leave her, the house will take care of its own." Something in his tone, calm, commanding, froze Alexei's hand. His uncle's gaze was steady, too steady, and behind those dark eyes lingered something like triumph. The chandelier above flickered again. The air thickened, as if the walls had drawn closer. One of the silent relatives, a woman Alexei barely remembered, a distant cousin perhaps, rose from the table and quietly removed Alina's chair, dragging it away with a long, scraping sound. Alina's body was left slumped on the floor, discarded like an empty shell. Alexei's voice broke the silence. "I don't understand any of this. What did she mean about the attic? Why are you all here? What are you hiding?" Sergei leaned back, folding his broad hands over his stomach. Not everything is yours to know, not yet. Alexei's temper snapped. You think I'll just sit here while people die around me? Tell me what happened to Marina. At her name, the faintest flicker passed across Sergei's face. Not fear, not guilt, something closer to amusement. You'll hear her soon enough, he said softly. The chandelier gave one final sputter and went out. Darkness swallowed the room. In the pitch-black, chairs scraped, footsteps shifted, breath too close to his ear. Alexei spun, fists raised, heart pounding. Then silence again. When the light stuttered back to life, the table was empty. Plates, glasses, food all gone. The chairs lined neatly against the walls. And Alina's body had vanished. Only a single thing remained on the table where Sergei had sat, a folded letter, stained with the same black-red smear. Alexei's shaking hands opened it. You are not the first to return, nor will you be the last. No name, only that now familiar fingerprint at the bottom. The chandelier hummed overhead, the house seemed to breathe. And Alexei realized with bone-deep certainty that he was no longer a guest here. He was the next offering. Part 7, the brother no one named. Alexei locked himself in the upstairs study, the letter still trembling in his hands. The room smelled of old books and moth-eaten leather, a place his mother had once forbidden him to enter alone. The single lamp on the desk sputtered weakly, throwing yellow light over shelves sagging with dusty tomes. He spread out the bundle of letters he'd found behind the floorboard. His mother's handwriting ran across each page, elegant yet frantic, lines slanting as if written in haste. He forced himself to read, heart pounding at every jagged word. You swore you buried him, you swore the house would keep him quiet, but I hear the footsteps at night, the dragging, and the children, they must never know, not about their uncle, not about what was done to keep him here. The ink blurred at the bottom, as if tears had soaked the paper. Alexei pushed the letters aside, sweat dampening his palms. An uncle, his mother had always claimed she was an only child, yet here was the truth, hidden under floorboards, there had been another. A sharp rap broke the silence, 3 knocks, deliberate, against the study door. Alexei froze. Who's there? His voice cracked in the stale air. No answer, just the faint scrape of nails against wood, slow, dragging down the panel. He lunged forward, flung the door open. The hallway was empty, but at the far end by the stairwell he glimpsed a figure, a man's silhouette, tall and thin, head cocked unnaturally to the side. Before Alexei could call out, the figure melted into the shadows. His breath came ragged as he stumbled back inside the study. The lamp flickered. On the desk, where the letters had lain, sat something that hadn't been there before. A photograph. It showed the house decades earlier, its facade less decayed. In front of it stood his grandparents, stiff in black coats. Beside them 2 children, his mother recognizable even as a girl, and next to her a boy of about 10, his hand gripping hers tightly. His face was blurred, the features smudged as if the photograph had rejected his likeness. Scrawled in ink across the bottom margin, Mikhail. Alexei's throat tightened. He whispered the name aloud, tasting it like poison. The chandelier above the hallway groaned. From somewhere deep in the house came the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards, slow, deliberate, as though it was making its way closer. Alexei clutched the photograph to his chest. His mother's letters, the locket, the stuffed rabbit, they were all fragments of a puzzle. But now at last he had a name. The name of the brother no one had spoken of. The name of the uncle who wasn't supposed to exist. Mikhail. And in the silence that followed, Alexei could swear he heard a whisper, carried on the house's breath. Still here. Part 8, the attic's second secret. The photograph of the blurred boy burned in Alexei's pocket as he climbed the ladder once more. Every instinct told him not to return, not after the pool of blood, the rocking horse, the toy rabbit, but the letters had left him no choice. If Mikhail had been hidden, if his existence erased, then perhaps the attic held the truth. The hatch creaked open, dust raining down on his face. The stench hit him harder this time, copper, mildew, and something sour like rotting meat. He gagged, covering his mouth with his sleeve, but pushed himself up into the dark. The rocking horse stood still in its corner now, frozen mid-arc. The pool of blood he'd seen before had spread wider, seeping into the wood, yet no body remained to explain it. He swept the beam of a flashlight across the room. Shadows lurched across the rafters, long and skeletal. That's when he noticed it, a section of the far wall darker than the rest. The boards were mismatched, newer than the others, as though someone had patched something closed. A chill raced up his spine. He approached, every step loud against the hollow floor. The boards were nailed unevenly, hammered in haste. He tugged at one, and to his shock it gave with a screech of nails. Another board followed, then another. Behind them lay a hollow recess, and inside something wrapped in cloth. His hands trembled as he pulled it free. The bundle was small, stiff, and sticky with dark stains. He unwrapped it slowly, breath shallow. A book no more like a diary, its leather cover cracked and flaking, its pages swollen with damp. Across the front, scrawled in uneven ink, "Mikhail." The flashlight flickered. The air grew heavy, charged with static. From behind him came a faint shuffle, a footstep. Alexei spun, the diary clutched tight. The attic was empty, shadows motionless. Yet the rocking horse had shifted. It now faced him directly. And then a whisper, close to his ear, though no one stood there. "Mine." The flashlight died. Darkness swallowed him. Heart slamming, he scrambled for the hatch, clutching the diary as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to himself. The wood beneath his hands felt slick, damp. Something warm dripped onto his wrist. When he glanced down, even in the dark he could see it. Blood seeping slowly from the ceiling beams, pattering onto the diary's cover. He burst through the hatch, slamming it shut behind him, chest heaving. In the dim glow of the hallway lamp, he looked down at what he carried. The diary's cover was smeared red, the ink of Mikhail's name almost illegible beneath the stains. And on his palm, where the blood had dripped, lay the perfect imprint of a child's hand. Part 9, Mikhail's diary. Alexei sat on the edge of the hallway, the diary trembling in his hands. Its leather cover was still slick with dark streaks, the damp smell of old blood rising from the pages. He flipped it open cautiously, the crack of the spine sounding far too loud in the suffocating silence of the house. The first entry was dated decades ago. The handwriting wavered uneven, as if the writer had been shaking with fear or pain. "They keep me here. Mother says it's for my own good. But the walls whisper at night, and sometimes I hear footsteps that aren't mine. They say I am not to speak of it. I do not know what will become of me if I do." Alexei's stomach churned. This was no ordinary childhood diary. Each page carried a heavy, desperate energy. The next entry was even more chilling. "Today Uncle Sergei came. He said family must be preserved at all costs. I must not cry, I must not leave. I hear the others sometimes in the dark. They whisper my name and laugh. I do not sleep. I cannot. Something lives in the house with us. It watches." Alexei's fingers shook as he turned page after page. Descriptions of secret rooms, hidden passageways, whispered threats, and a constant, almost tangible dread filled the diary. The air around him thickened, the house itself seeming to lean closer, listening. "I think the locket belongs to me. They took it when I was a boy. They said I must forget. But at night I feel it calling. And sometimes I dream that someone comes for me in the hallway. I am alone, alone, alone." Alexei pressed a hand to his chest, the sense of claustrophobia overwhelming. He remembered the crimson trail leading up the stairs, the rocking horse, the blood-stained rabbit, Alina's inexplicable death, and now this, proof that Mikhail had been trapped in the house, hidden, tortured by secrecy. A sudden rustle behind him made him jump. The hallway was empty, or so it seemed. Yet a faint tap echoed softly against the walls. The diary fell to his knees, open to a page soaked with old stains and unreadable ink. A whisper slithered through the air. "You shouldn't have found me." Alexei spun, but only shadows greeted him. Then from the corner of his eye he saw it, a flicker of movement across the stairs. A shadow, tall and thin, vanished before he could focus. His heart pounded, adrenaline sharp in his veins. Mikhail was here, or something claiming Mikhail's presence. Alexei clutched the diary tighter. His gaze fell on the final, hastily written entry. "If you are reading this, it means I have failed. Do not trust anyone, not even the walls. They eat the truth. They feed on it and on us. Beware the locket. Beware the eyes that watch from family portraits. You are next." The words seared themselves into his mind. Alexei realized the truth. This house was alive in a way no one could understand, feeding on its family, hiding its sins, and now he had stepped into its pattern. A soft, wet scraping sound rose from the floor above. Alexei looked up. From the attic hatch a dark shape seemed to pulse, almost breathing. A whisper, closer this time. "Mine." He scrambled to his feet, the diary clutched to his chest. The house groaned and shifted, shadows stretching, closing in. Every instinct screamed for him to run, and yet he knew that escape was no longer an option. Alexei had uncovered Mikkel's truth, and now the house was coming for him. Part 10: The Hidden Passage. The diary weighed heavy in Alexei's hands as he moved through the dim corridor. The house seemed to pulse around him, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the suffocating silence. The whispers from Mikkel's diary lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that the past here was not dead, it was alive, watching. He approached the wall beneath the grand staircase, the place where, as a child, he had felt a strange draft he could never explain. Now, armed with the diary and a growing sense of dread, he pressed his palm against the wood. The wall responded, a faint click, barely audible, and a section of the paneling shifted inward, dust puffed into the air. Behind it lay a narrow passage, dark, cold, smelling of damp earth and rot. Alexei hesitated, heart hammering. The thought of what might lie within made his stomach tighten, yet he knew he had to see it. Mikkel's diary, the blood, the rocking horse, the locket, it all pointed here. He squeezed through the opening. The passage was tight, forcing him to crawl on hands and knees. The air was thick, metallic, smelling of old decay and something sweeter, like copper mixed with soil. Each breath felt heavy, as if the house itself resisted his intrusion. At the end of the crawl space, a small chamber opened up. The floor was layered with dust, except for a narrow path that glistened darkly. Alexei froze. Fresh footprints, tiny, child-sized, marred the dust. They stopped abruptly at the center of the room. And there on a stone pedestal lay a box, old wood, blackened with age and moisture, bound with rusted iron clasps. Alexei's hands shook as he reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed the lid, a cold wind swept through the passage, extinguishing the small lantern he had brought. Shadows writhed along the walls, elongating, twisting. He opened the box. Inside lay a small, folded cloak, tattered and stained. Beneath it, a tiny journal, Mikkel's handwriting etched across the pages. But there was something else, something Alexei hadn't expected. A set of keys, their metal darkened with age, and a medallion identical to Marina's, only older, worn, and engraved with the initials MK. The room seemed to breathe around him. A whisper, low and hollow, came from the walls. "You shouldn't have found this." Alexei's heart thudded painfully. He realized the medallion Marina had worn, the one he had found in the first part, was not hers originally. It had belonged to Mikkel. Somehow it had resurfaced in the family line, tied to blood, secrets, and perhaps the curse itself. A scraping sound from behind made him spin. The narrow passage was empty, yet the dust shifted as though someone or something had moved through it. The faintest laugh echoed, childlike but wrong, distorted from the shadows. "He belongs to me." Alexei clutched the medallion, the keys, and the journal. The whispers and shadows pressed closer. Every instinct screamed to run, but the house seemed to stretch, lengthen, trapping him inside the passage. He realized with a cold certainty that Mikkel's story was far from over, and that whatever had been hidden here, whatever had been kept alive through blood, fear, and secrecy, was now aware of him. The house, the diary, the medallion, all were connected. And the next revelation, Alexei knew, would bring him face to face with the truth about Mikkel and the dark legacy of his family.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories.